Ladies and gentlemen, sorry, I forgot we're supposed to do the Season 1, Episode 2 of Andor. That would be me. So, recaps. I've actually talked extensively about the very concept of recaps when it comes to television. And I understand that it is a bit of a compromise. It is, it's a thing, for lack of a better way to put that. And I admit that I find it irritating, but I'm not going to begrudge it because I understand why it exists. And as long as there's a button to literally skip it, sure. If you remember, I actually had a whole speech about this back during the Justified streamations as well, because that was a problem over there. But anyways, yeah, no, there's a reason why most services, and I'm watching this on Disney Plus, so I can tell you they do offer that service, offer a frickin' skip button. In fact, I have to skip the recap, and then I have to skip the intro. So we get back into it, back to the flashback. Can I just say, I really hope his sister's dead. Because this is Star Wars, and there's worse options. Outfits! I didn't really comment on it last time, but all the kids are wearing almost scavenged outfits. It's also our very, very first shot of the planet in something other than just the wildwoods and their little hut, their little village thing going on. We see tiny little bits of technology, just a few tidbits. Like, it's actually really fascinating. As they pan, the camera pans with them. Straight. God, I can't remember what that's called. It's a non-swerving pan. It's literally just straight pan like this, right? Look, if I'm going to skip Enterprise's goddamn intro, I'm going to skip this one. Let's skip Voyagers. And as it's going, we see a couple tiny bits of tech, and then a few more bits of tech, and then a lot more bits of tech, until finally we get up to Cassian, and he looks out, and we see what he's been looking at. And it's one of our first real establishing shots. In fact, this specific episode has no less than 3 establishing shots in it, whereas the previous one had only 1, and it was at the very, very, very beginning. Interesting little approach there. The other thing that I caught immediately is they look out onto this absolutely colossal quarry. And they pull a trick that I love. It's a necessary trick, especially when it comes to fiction, but people do this in real life as well. Let's say I hold up something for you. I say, hey, here's how big this is. You immediately and instinctively, without even having to process it, know how big this is. Why? Well, because it's being held up against my hand, right? You have a comparison point. You have a relative comparison point of its rough size because you know how big a hand is. Now, my hand might be bigger or smaller than yours, so you don't know an exact size, but you can process it immediately, right? How many of you have seen any kind of thing where there's a bit of a visual, almost an optical illusion going, where you don't really have sense of scale or scope, and so they will then specifically put someone in that shot so you can realize how big what you're looking at is, or how small it is, for that matter. Getting back into this quarry, to really get across the sense of scale, it doesn't just take up 90% of the shot. In the distance, there's a bucket wheel excavator. Now, if you happen to not know what a bucket wheel excavator is, do me a favor really quick and just go Google that. Have you ever seen one of those up front? Because those things are colossal. And that thing in the back there is like this big. Yeah, bucket wheel excavators are gigantic. And so, same trick, right? We see that, we see the quarry, and it's like, oh. And you get an idea for the scale and scope of this operation. Because the implication is there in the background. This is one quarry. So then we cut to a guy in the tower. This actually confused me a little bit. Just for a little bit. Yeah, they use rulers like that as well for that kind of thing. Because he's just there and he's banging the bell. But then I realized that he was signaling the end of the workday. And I really like this because it's filler. Now, I know what you're going to say, Lore, just yesterday you were complaining about filler. In fact, actually, it was 2 days ago. You're complaining about filler in Star Wars show. And yeah, but as I talked about, if you're paying attention then, I mentioned that filler is not inherently bad. Quite contrary, actually. Filler can be good, bad, or in between. It's its own thing, right? You can do good stuff with filler in order to help give an episode time to breathe or flesh out the characters or whatever. Or you can just have gristle. This is an analogy that came up by the One Joker, someone who doesn't watch my show anymore, but this is all the way back in the days of the WoW lore run, because there's Time Grappler. Wow. There's fat, which can add to the flavor of a steak, and there's gristle, which can't. This is not gristle. This helps flesh out the thing, gives us a little bit of an idea of what we're looking at and why. Helps to establish some of the nature of the community and the work shifts. Little things like that. Yeah, it's the same thing as showing a couple of drunk aliens arguing in the Mos Eisley Cantina. That's exactly right. It doesn't really have anything to do with anything, but it is there to kind of help things breathe a little bit and help fill things out a little bit. And if it's done well, then it's done well. I even love little details. Like, you notice he's not only got the ear protection, which of course he does, but he also clearly likes his job and is doing he's really careful, like preps himself, winds up, takes another shot, bong bong, and just does it's actually really legit. I'm not even joking. It's a nice bit of filler, which is exactly what filler should be. It should be that little thing that makes you go. There's another thing I never realized until I started producing my own fiction that's important about scenes like these. I'm going to go and cast shade at myself here. How many of you have watched any of my rewrites? There are 3 that have gone live so far. A dominant problem I had, especially in the Final Fantasy I rewrite, was that there is no filler whatsoever. None. Every second is utilized very carefully and adamantly as part of the main plot or a character-centric scene. And that's arguably not a good thing. One of the most common complaints I got about RFF1 was specifically the fact that it was hard to process. And that struck me as weird. Because, you know, of course it did. Like, I did a lot of good writing and a lot of good presentation, and all kinds of fun stuff. But it didn't occur to me until I actually did a deep dive on my own work that I realized the problem. Exactly, I needed more spacing. Moments like these allow the viewer to take a second and just chew on it for a bit, right? Mentally process what's already happened. And so, yeah, exactly, Kitten Fan. Filler, just like fat, absolutely can make that steak taste so much better. And to not use an analogy, it allows the viewer to prep as well as to process. It's like a chkung ready for the next moment, right? Without that, all you have is moment. That can work for certain works, but FF1 wasn't designed to be one of those works. I just ripped all fat and all filler out of it completely. And that was to its detriment. I actually feel bad about that because I think RFF1's actually a really, really good movie that I imagine most people aren't going to watch because there's no time to actually process things. And that's on me, again. That is my fault. So, it also helps to, I'll say, so someone mentioned this in chat just a moment ago. Filler can be there for character, it can be there for flavor, it can be there for humor, it can be there for world building. In this case, this is a bit of world building. This shows how much of a community they have, how much trust they place in that, and how low tech they are. Even though they have a whole lot of, you know, fairly typical Star Wars-y tech around, they got a guy who bangs on a giant metal drum to wake everyone up and to tell everyone to go to sleep, to tell them it's the end of the workday. And they all rely on that too. They don't have like alarms or whatever. It's the dude on the bell. That's how they set up their day. That says a lot. It's also very Star Wars, if I might be so bold. Once again, merging that fantasy with science fiction. And he loves it. He loves his workday. Anyways. So then there's this wonderful little showcasing where you know, he's doing his thing up there, but we see almost all the people we just saw Cassian interact with during the previous day. We see the guy at the port who's tying up. We see the people with their gloves and Bresso? I can't remember. We see the guy who tried to shake down Cassian earlier. We see the owner of the shop who helped Rix get in contact with the other guy. And each of these individual people is the people we've already been introduced to. This is another interesting trick that fiction likes to use. Good fiction. Now, if I might be so bold to compare this to another bit of good fiction that does the same thing, and you're going to make fun of me for this. Star Trek The Next Generation, of all things, did a really good job with this same approach. It makes sure that the same people with voices of the same people in the same roles, the same actors to be more accurate, are always there in the background so that there's a bit of automatic subconscious visual continuity going on. I bet most of you don't know who Ensign Knight is, but if I showed you a picture of her, you'd be like, I know who that woman is, because she's always there at the con whenever there's a non-named character at the con. And that kind of consistency helps. Babylon 5 pulls the same trick. So, then we see Jealous Guy, who is stalking his girlfriend. I actually, in my notes, stopped typing out his name as Jealous Guy and started calling him Stalker Guy. I hate Stalker Guy. Not because he's jealous, not because he has suspicions, and not because he decides to sell a Cassian, but because he stalks his girlfriend. I don't feel the need to continue explaining that point. So he continues stalking his girlfriend. I also really like the little tidbit where, I'm not going to name him. His name is struck for me. He is Stalker Guy from now on. I love the little tidbit where she gets the message, shuts it down, and he's like, oh, I got to see what this message is. Because clearly this is a message about, you know, like the guy whose dick she's sucking, right? Oh, it's just a message about, you know, it's from the local corporate sector authority. Okay, sure. I love the little attachment, how they actually show us what the Arabesh means in English, hovering right next to him so we can get the gist of the message. I only mentioned that as an aside because, well, Star Wars is actually fairly consistent with Arabesh because Arabesh is a transliteral, I think, language. In other words, every letter in the English alphabet has an Arabish equivalent. It's nice somehow to be able to say it because I can't read Arabish. Well, I noticed the payphone. Getting a little bit ahead of myself here. So then he comes home, and that's Fiona Shaw. First actor I recognized immediately and on spot. Just holy crap! I didn't even have to look her name up. She's been in quite a few things. She's good. She's good stuff. And yeah, we have Fiona Shaw in Star Wars. I don't even. So Cassian comes up with a different lie for his injury, but then starts to get his details right. And it's interesting the way he recovers this. He starts off lying to her, and then quickly switches over to the underlie, like the other lie that he was trying to approach, the one he ran by Russo. Oh, Stalker Boyfriend is so much worse than Aerith. OCD Mall Cop, he's got issues. Stalker Boyfriend is a stalker. I'm sorry to keep emphasizing this. He stepped over the line the moment he got his nomenclature. You know what I mean? Poor B2 and his stuttering. Also, we see that he can literally talk himself out of power, so that's awful. I wish I could just run this entire scene by you, because every millisecond of this scene is perfection. I'm not even joking. This is another one of those best scenes in the episodes kind of deals. So, who did you tell about Canary? There was a person from Canary. And this scene is so good. There's so much going on quickly. Who else knows? Well, officially, no, nobody knows. Yes, but people. And then there's this bit where he gets defensive and points to, you've told people too. And her response is, everybody I've ever told is dead. He doesn't believe her. And yet, based on what we can already see, there's actually a pretty decent chance what she's saying is legitimate. So he decides to go on the counteroffensive. Oh, what about this and this? And she says, oh, they're family, defensively. So he attacks her with this. Hang on. If we're making a list, we're making a list. And so she immediately, rather than even answering him, attacks right back. Oh, I'm more worried about your women. And he just walks away from that, actually physically, bodily separates himself from her, because he was standing right next to her up until that point. And she starts listing women, and he starts freaking out. And this whole time, the whole situation is escalating. And then B2 mentions Bix, and his reaction is immediate. You leave Bix out of this. Which is doubly interesting because she's the one most involved in this. And this whole escalation keeps going and keeps going. And then finally, she erupts. And the way she says this, I cannot even possibly emulate it. Who told these Primor bastards about Canary? We don't need all the details. because everything that matters is right there on the screen. She's so into this. Her emotion is right there on the front. And as she's trying to figure out what's going on, he goes to B2 trying to figure out what's going on with this message from Bix. And she resets her tone, but she starts escalating and escalating and escalating until finally he shouts to her and he just says one word, "Wait!" And that's all he says to her. And then he rushes back to B2 trying to get, that's hilarious, Casual, trying to get the information on what's going on with Pix until finally B2 shuts down from the power outage. And at this point, Marva's tone is completely different. And from a tone of quiet, concerned caring. "Cassian, what have you done?" And his response is just, "Stop." God damn. Yeah, no, that's mom energy right there. We make fun of, you know, stereotypical moms and overbearing moms and all that kind of, there's a bunch of tropes, right? A bunch of motherly tropes. But that right there, that's a mother. God damn, that scene is amazing. Everything about that scene is amazing. The blockage, the acting, the physicality, the camera angles, the presentation, the escalation, the re-escalation. This then cuts immediately. Don't actually show the answer. This just cuts immediately to Cassian going to visit Bix. Sorry, I'm trying to keep all these names stuck in my head. I'm covering a lot of shows at the same time right now. You got to work with me here. So Cassian goes to cover Bix, or to talk with Bix. And can I just say that I really hate Stalker Guy? This is what I officially started calling him, Stalker Guy, in my notes right here, because he's so Cassian goes. He's like, all right. And notice he has been properly chastised. The first and only time in the 2 episodes so far he has shown any kind of contrition. Immediately after, he just opened up to his mother. Tell me those points aren't related. So he's like, all right, I'll sell it to you. Just give me enough money to get off world. That's all I need. Because he's trying to get the trouble away from his family. From the people he cares about. Doesn't have to say that. Nothing in the episode says that. It doesn't need to. But unfortunately, she already sent out the message. It's also doubly interesting. Yes, Uthor. It's doubly interesting how he's a little surprised by that. And he clearly expected her to either not send the message at all, or to not have done it already. And yet she, and this shows a little bit of her connection to Cassian, has already on faith done this because she could probably tell that this was something real. So, okay. Message is sent. I'll figure it out. And then Stalker Guy goes to the payphone to call it in. Gives him a name. There's this little tidbit. There's a little tidbit later. We actually see it twice, by the way, Luthor. Once when he mentions Bix to his mother, and the other regarding his mother. So, there's this little bit where later in the episode, I love how this episode will add context to itself. This is definitely a show that it is meant to be watched multiple times. That's why he's a Timmy. There's a bit later in the episode where some random guy running the spaceport, and Cassian talks about him trying to get a ride, you know, to get a ride off planet. 700, that's the floor. You want speed and discretion? But they're looking up the call from CorpSec. And what's really fascinating about this is there's a single line there which says everything. Did you catch it? Because the line is, no, there's no reward. Deputy Boy, who you notice still has not been named, is so stupid and so hilariously awful. Stupid might not even be the right word. He has drunk his Kool-Aid so much that he doesn't think he needs to post a reward. Why would he need to do that? This is a murder. I'm trying to deal with a murder case, and I'm trying to hunt down a convicted criminal. This man has murdered 2 innocent people. Murder, 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 murder. So, this blind idiot thinks he doesn't need to post a reward. Now, that says a lot about him and his insanity. But it's also doubly interesting because it helps to emphasize why so few people are going to be willing to sell out Cassian, because there's nothing in it for them. But then that makes Stalker Guy even worse, because there's no reward. He sells out Cassian for nothing. It's a brilliant line. That's such a brilliant line. And it adds so much character to both Stalker Guy and Deputy. You could say it's jealousy. That's valid. But that's not really what I mean, is it? What does he gain from this, right? Oh, God, he totally does. He's totally COMPNOR. Oh, my God, he's totally COMPNOR. How many of you even know what COMPNOR is? Because it's from the EU. I don't even think it's in the AU. Ah, the mission for the preservation of the New Order, by the way. Yeah, I'm a geek, thanks. So... Damn it. It's too far buried. Already packed it. One moment, please. The Commission for the Preservation of the New Order was formed in Imperial City months after Palpatine assumed power. Initially, COMPNOR was little more than a social gathering for idealistic young people who saw in the New Order a deliverance from the chaos of the dying days of the Old Republic. One of the Emperor's advisors, Kruya Vandron, saw the potential worth of a populist movement which could be molded into a useful political tool. Overt encouragement and discreet funding were provided, giving COMPNOR the appearance of spontaneous organization enjoying phenomenal growth. Kruya Vandron gave COMPNOR the resources to grow, but the Emperor took a personal hand in shaping the organization. His methods were patient, defeating his opponents within, not through violence or threats, but with hidden, gentle, and consistent pressure which wore down the opposition. Those who opposed change in COMPNOR never knew the Emperor had done anything to instigate the change, and most could not even explain how the nature of their organization differed from what they had envisioned. Key members of the group were approved for the Select Committee, which is a part of the COMPNOR that would oversee the rest of the organization through implicit approval by the Emperor. Now, COMPNOR consists of several entities within it. These, of course, include the Select Committee, the SAG Group, Progress, Improvements, Comp Force, oh, and my personal favorite, the ISB. That stands for the Imperial Security Bureau, if you're not familiar with it. So, to get back into this, Deputy is super COMPNOR. Just streams it. So does the Sergeant, actually, Mosk. So, Stalker Guy goes to sell him out. We cut back to the security office, the corporate security office. And I love this whole sequence, by the way. I love how all the people there are just doing their everyday 9-to-5 job, blah, 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 blah. Doing their own thing. And there's this moment. I love the actor. I've fallen in love with Deputy Guy entirely because the actor has just been nailing it so hard. There's this wonderful moment where they pull up the image, the old, out-of-date image of a slightly youngified Diego Luna. And the guy looks at him, and then he does this. He doesn't actually do it as much as I'm doing it. I'm just doing it so you can see the movement. He actually does it more subtly, just like this. Right about there. He narrows his eyes and leans forward, as if he's identifying the killer. As if he's like, you are my enemy. Yeah, he thinks he's so big. He's just, yes, I got you. Like, you could just, he doesn't say that. He doesn't need to say that, because we can hear it thundering in his head, drowning out all other thought. And then the camera pans to the woman from the brothel earlier. And again, a bad show. I shouldn't be so unkind. A less good show would see that woman come in. And then she would be like, yes, I met that man, and he was this, and blah, blah. And they'd have to play all it out. They don't need to. Instead, she just shows up. He looks up at her. End scene. And yeah, Cassian is nobody. He's a level 0 nothing who accidentally killed one guy and then purposefully killed another who was completely at his own mercy. He has some points in charisma, and that's kind of it. Like, that's what he's got. And yeah, you absolutely can feel that deputy thinks he's the main character here. He thinks he's Luke frickin' Skywalker. He really does. And it's so great the way he presents it. I can't wait to see how absolutely horrific everything becomes under this asshole. Because you know he's the Javert of this situation, right? So, they go back to the boyfriend's place. Bix has, Bix? Crix? Oh god, I already forgot her name. So yeah, she goes back to his place, and there's this interesting moment. It's actually a breather scene. It's a filler scene. It is Bix. Okay, I got it right. So she goes to Stalker Guy, and there's this really great part where she's like, you all right? Yeah, I am now. And I like to think that he really feels really good about having sold Cassian out. Like, he probably feels better about this than he has in a while. You know what's really funny? If Deputy, Mr. Main Character, wasn't who he was, this would have amounted to absolutely nothing, right? This would have been such a nothing burger. There would have been no significance or support or anything. What would have happened is Cassian would have come back, freaked out, gone to ground for a bit, hid, nothing would have happened because no report, no one cares. And he would eventually come back and go back to his everyday life. That's it. That's all that would have happened. And yet, if Cassian hadn't been pushed here, how would things have gone for, random example, A New Hope? So, I do like how even the corporate offices still look kind of grimy, by the way. Very Star Warsy. Then Mosk shows up. I know it's horrible that the two characters I find best so far are both the villains. And let's be clear, they are villains. Everything Mosk says is terrifying, especially living in the United States right now. And yeah, I'm willing to say that. We need a stronger hand with these affiliated planets. Or the thought of doing anything less than full engagement in a case like this. Or the best way to keep a blade sharp is to use it. Which is not only wrong, actually, but a terrifyingly dangerous thought. So Mosk... Yeah, no, Mosk is an Imperial. I shouldn't use that word. He has drunk the Galactic Empire's Kool-Aid. He's... yeah. Corporate tactical forces are the Empire's first line of defense. Uh-huh. Yeah, he's a fascist. He is full tilt a believer in fascism. And yeah, the deputy boy... Deputy boy feels more like... Well, again, like he's this big, you know, haha, I'm going to serve the situation. Mosk, he doesn't care. He's not... The main approach, and I love this dichotomy, because the main approach for Deputy is justice. I hate to say this because he's extremely wrong and terrible, but Deputy really does care about the fact that this is a murder. There's a reason he keeps using that word over and over and over. To him, the problem is a crime was committed and then it just an end statement. If I could put it into very simple terminology, and I bet a lot of you know what this feels like, the formula is incomplete. How many of you, you don't have to oust yourself, but answer in your head, how many of you, if there's something that just stops, that isn't concluded, it bothers you? Maybe a little bit, maybe a lot. It depends on your own personal brain and how your personality works. But it just kind of bothers you that it's just, end statement. Sally and Dolly walk to the street and then... So, that's where I'm getting Deputy, right? That's what he feels. He's just staring at like, and then what? And then what? Mosk? Mosk is terrifying, especially since Mosk is actually competent. We'll talk about that in just a second. So I didn't really mention this last time. Do you notice that Cassian's sleeping hangout is in a freaking junkyard, in a wreck in a junkyard? He probably could sleep with his mother. Phrasing. He probably could stay at his mother's house, you know, live with his mother. But he's been every time we've seen him sleep has been out in this wreck in a junkyard. Now it's possible that's his hideout. Yes, he's having tons of sex with his mother. It's possible that's just his hideout. It's possible that's just where he goes to go to ground. We'll see. So it cuts really quick back to this wonderful scene. He pulls out the thing, and we see a little piece of gear. And what's really great about this piece of gear is the visual design. This is, I've talked about this before, in video games, doodads is about how much you put the stuff in the background, right? Someone has to draw and render and then place that in a way that makes sense. That's doodad design. In shows and movies, it's props, prop design, right? Someone has to build that prop, stylize it, design it, etc. And so there's incredible lighting in this scene. And the lighting is also very, very stark, which is important because the entire thing so far, I almost said movie, the entire show so far, both episode 1 and 2, are very, very Star Wars, very lived in, very gritty, very dirty. Except for this prop. This thing is pristine. This thing is polished. It shines in that bright light, and we can see that Imperial seal on it very, very clearly. So, okay. There it is. There's that super important piece of thing. I'm with it. And he's like, okay. Got that. Pulls out his freaking gun. Clearly very, very on edge. Clearly freaking out. And this cuts us back to another little bit of the flashback scene, which they keep showing bits and pieces of, and we finally see exactly what they've been going after, which is the crashed ship, which they showed earlier. I want to talk very, very, very briefly about the language the Kenari are using, because I actually did notice that, Cashel. Although, thank you for pointing that out. I should say that out loud. Yeah, he's using a Briar pistol. Kyle Katarn references. We don't know yet, Magister. We don't need to know. Not yet. Made-up languages are a thing. There's actually... So, anybody can say nonsense, right? Hey, blah, 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 blah. You know, anybody can say nonsense. But that doesn't sound like a language. There are tricks. Obviously, you can just make a language like Klingon over in Star Trek, which is a language with grammar and rules and vocabulary. But what you can also do is you can make up rules for how a language sounds and then just follow through on that. This is actually really easy to prove because we happen to be covering Star Wars, and Huttese is not a real language. They just have rules for how it sounds. If I start saying Insta damfitopo, inshapunto tinkoto, Indlas timpashitimpoya, Impas dashimboto. It sounds like a language, right? It has a pattern to it, a cadence, a speech, emphasis on certain vowels, emphasis on what kind of vowels are combined with which kind of consonants. There's a patterning to it. There's no real hatis. There's no real structure to it. It's just designed a little bit so it sounds like that. And I bring this up because I'm wondering if the language that they're using here for the Canary is actually a language, like a real-life language or a made-up language or just a sounded made-up language, because there's all kinds of options there. Anyways, so there's the crashed ship. They are so on edge as they approach it. I'll come back to that in a second, because then we say Skarsgård. Can I just say that he's an amazing actor that I love? Can I say that? Is that allowed? I don't even remember the first time I saw him. I think it was actually in the MCU of all things. But Skarsgård's awesome. He's done a lot of stuff over the years, and he does a very, very good job of it. Anybody who's seen the recent Dune movies has seen him do the best Baron Harkonnen I have ever seen in my life. And I've seen several people attempt that role over the years in games as well as in shows and movies. Skarsgård is legit. We're just bringing out all the stops, aren't we? We've got a grand total of, like, I think 4 amazing actors already. Like, we don't have any bad acting, but we have 4 really, really good actors in this show already, and that's just damn. So we have some very smart dialogue with him talking to the ship in a way that makes perfect sense in character. Again, very smart exposition. I'm always going to point it out because it's always good. Smart exposition. I love it. And then they also hide his face for a while until we do our first real establishing shot of the city. Oh, hey, I remember that trick because Arcane pulled the same thing, too. In fact, as I was pointing out earlier, this is actually only our third of 3 establishing shots in the entire sequence so far in 2 episodes. Cut to Stalker Guy, who's watching his girlfriend sleep. What's really fascinating about that is that could be a sweet, tender moment kind of a thing. But they made sure to make sure he was in a posture and a position and just the way he talked about it, that it was not actually sweet, that it was kind of creepy. I hate Stalker Guy. Does he die? Don't tell me. Don't tell me. We have a brief conversation with B2, which is a wonderful conversation because on the off chance you missed it earlier, this is now telling what they've already shown, that he does actually care about someone other than himself. This is what Huthor brought up earlier. He mentions that he has a bunch of credits that he has hid away specifically from Marva, his mother from earlier, that if everything goes well, he will give them to her himself. But if it doesn't, B2 needs to know where they are, so B2 can give them to her. That's why we have the comm. Okay, all of that makes perfect sense. And all of this lines up beautifully with how seriously he's taking this whole thing, too. Okay, I'm with all of this. Also notice that as he's moving, there's this Canary-styled music. Yeah, that's true, Cashel. Both Stalker Guy and Bix keep saying, I'm just tired. There's this tension. It's the Canary music, which builds up in the background before the transition happens, and then we switch to them inspecting the crashed ship. And what I love about this scene is that we, the audience, don't know why it's so tense. Even after the scene ends, we don't actually know why it's so tense. Why did the Republic guy start shooting on them there? Like, why was that a thing? They've got the emblem, so we know they're with the Republic. At least I'm pretty sure it's the Republic. So why did he just start shooting on them? No explanation, and we don't know. In fact, there's so much going on here, I actually did something very unusual for me. I decided actively to not speculate, because there's too little information to speculate on, which I'm fine with because of what it does. What it does is it makes us feel very, very tense between camera angle, between the movement of the actors in it, between the music that's playing in it, between how they're showing the shots. Everything about this scene screams tension before the guy gets up and starts shooting people. In other words, we don't need to know why it's tense. All we need to know is that it's tense because it's tense for the kids. They're the ones who are tense here. And if you're paying attention, this is the third time I've noticed that the show is trying to shove us into the viewpoint of the characters. Not literally, not moving the camera behind the eyes, but by putting all of the focus on what the characters are feeling, what the characters are hearing, what the characters are sensing. So, there is this wonderful approach here. And yes, I wasn't even going to bring up, but yeah, literally yesterday. Too late for what? The Republic's already gone. Yeah. So the crewman starts shooting. Again, not sure what's going on. They all bring him down. And then we get our first real bit of tidbit about what the hell's going on with Canary, because there's the guy, I actually already referenced this guy, the guy at the spaceport, who's looking up what the hell Canary is. This is when we find out that there's no reward. And he says, yeah, Canary, mid-rim, abandoned after Imperial mining disaster. Abandoned, considered toxic. Yep, cool. And then he goes just back to Cassian as if nothing was changed. Notice that Diego Luna, who is a very good actor, I feel like pointing out. Oh, absolutely, Uthor. Who's a very good actor, manages to go out of his way to specifically act like he's not a good actor. I know that sounds like a strange way to put that. Let me say that more simply. Cassian isn't that good at his poker face yet. I've actually been noticing this whole time, but this is probably the most obvious time where he physically reacts. And thankfully, the other guy wasn't looking at him when it happens. In fact, did you catch that? The guy was looking at his screen when Cassian has this quick double take, and then, what's that? Like pulls the lie out. But there's that moment of obvious, huh? Right before he manages that. Makes sense. Level 0. I'm going to keep saying that as much as it keeps being relevant. I have a feeling we're going to see Cassian level up very quickly across this show. Yeah, amateur agent. Oh my god. So you want immediacy, you want discretion. That's expensive. 700 is my floor. Okay. And then, I mean, that was the point of Rogue One. He at least had character levels as of Rogue One, though. He at least knew what the hell he was doing. Would I say he's getting to levels so far? No. You put a gun to my head. I think he's level 0 right now, which there's a whole thing going into that I'm not going to tell you about, but you get the idea. He's level 0. Most people in D&D are actually level 0, just to get that out there. The overwhelming majority of people, the terminology is they don't have class levels. Even if they have HP and stats and charisma and all that, they have no class levels. So all those people are level 0. They actually later on, I think in 3rd edition, might have been in 2nd edition, invented the concept of NPC classes specifically so they could start giving stats to some of these people. Anyways, yeah, he got his first experience ever from those 2 rent-a-cops. So then we cut to this wonderful, this beat-up, terrible-looking ship, which is in hyperspace, and the rent-a-cops are there. And I love how much of a level 1 encounter this is. I really do. 12 guys. 12 freaking guys. And Mosk gives this disturbingly effective speech. What I can only refer to as a Nazi speech, because it freaking is. He even has this wonderful tidbit where he says, and I wrote this down, if anybody has any issue, remind them that there is a territorial forum once a month in which they can lodge complaints. And all of the guys actually just giggle a little bit at that. Like, it does. It totally does, Rax. So yeah, so Mosk, but the thing that's important here is Mosk gives a terrifying and surprisingly effective speech. Gets the troops riled up. They're ready to go. And now the deputy, still not named, gives a few words. And this is so good. Because this guy comes forward, and you can feel what he wants, right? 1 second. Yeah, all yours, sir. All yours, sir. Let me switch songs really quick here. Give me 1 second. Because the type of music that starts playing is more like this. In his head. Right? Right? Some of you are going to get this immediately. I'm just going to let this keep playing. And he's just like, he's up there. And he's going to give this big speech. And you could see in his mind that this is what he's going to do. And he just completely crumbles immediately. he just starts crumbling instantly as he's starting to give his speech. But what's really so messed up about this is this man with negative charisma, who cannot even give his own speech without stuttering and stumbling. He has no sense of pacing. He has no sense of presentation. He has absolutely no idea how to speak it. It's so terrible. It's so terrible. And everyone makes fun of him for it. Except for Mosk, who forces a clap. But did you pay attention to what he actually said? This is fascinating. Because Mosk gave a rile-up speech. And I'm going to say something a little bit unpopular. A rile-up speech is usually vacuous. Doesn't actually mean anything. Doesn't actually say anything. It's there to hit emotions. It's there to make you feel. It's there to make you engage the other part of your brain. No, not that one. Stop thinking in the gutter. This is about real things. About principles. About standing on the ability to give a wonderful speech. But what does the deputy say? The deputy is talking about justice. About people being uncertain about what they can do. About their place in the galaxy. I should have written the whole thing down. It's fantastic. You know, hang on. Let me see if I can find it really quick. Give me a second. Of course not. There's no room on the road. No, there's no room for doubt on the road to justice. Oh, man. Just... And I find myself wondering, do you think he knows how pathetic he is? Do you think he processed how much he lost that room? He did notice one of the guards literally yawning in the middle of the speech. Very demonstrably. Now, here's the deal. From his worldview, do you think that he is acknowledging his own lack of charisma? Or is he going to place that blame on them for not living up to the ideals he so truly holds to be true? That obviously these people don't believe the way he does. That they don't believe in things like justice, like decency and order. That they don't understand what is required when the world pulls them down. When they have to face things like corruption and fear as they rise above the ashes to make a new order. Sorry, it's the music. Murder! I'm being serious, though. I'm being serious. I really feel like this guy... Earlier in the episode, you remember that recontextualization thing that this episode pulls? Earlier in the episode, there's a bit... There's this wonderful bit where Mosk comes in, and Mosk is on his side. And what is Deputy's first reaction, his knee-jerk, immediate reaction to that? Vilification, right? Or not vilification, vindication. Vindication. Exactly, that's exactly what I was saying. I've been saying this whole time. Nobody's been taking me... He doesn't say it, but what he means is, nobody's been taking me seriously. Nobody's been caring about this. I've been trying to do this with this. This is such a big deal, and nobody else has been treating me with any level of respect or decency except for you. And he clings to Mosk. And then Mosk talks him up, and then he's like, yes. And then, I love this actor so much. Hope we see more of him, legitimately. Yeah, they hype each other up. They make each other worse. It's so awful. And then he gives his he gives his speech to the other Rent-A-Cops, and they don't go into it at all. I think his reaction to that is not I suck or I'm wrong. It's they don't understand. These are just more corporate stoolies like my boss. That's my take. We'll see if I'm right eventually. Do I think Mosk is feeding him honey? No, I think Mosk is a fascist. I know what you're thinking. But Lore, that's stupid. Yes, people can be very, very stupid. I'm sorry, I'm trying too hard not to get into this. But honestly, I don't even have to point to real life now to point to fascism. Unfortunately, we have plenty of history to point to instead. And if there's one thing that is consistently true about fascism, is that it gets a lot of weird amount of support at the ground level by people who, by all intents and purposes, probably shouldn't actually support it because it's not in their best interest, even like pragmatically. But they do. We know that there are people at the ground floor of the Nazi regime of Germany in World War II, or prior to World War II, who absolutely bought the Kool-Aid, who absolutely were true believers and totally were into it because I don't have to point to Real Die for Real Day to do that. I can point to several years ago because, yeah. And once again, you feel that theme pushing down on whoever happens to be below you. There's this nice little moment, then, where Skarsgård is there. I didn't know his character name yet. And he's just chilling. The old guy walks over, starts chatting with him. I've been there. It's actually fascinating. You ever been in public transit before? Probably a lot of you have. You've probably met people like this guy who just start talking with total strangers out of nowhere. I'm pretty extroverted. I'm usually not that guy. But if you're the guy who's going to talk to me, yeah, we can have a few hour conversations. One time I was driving, I was in a bus coming from Pennsylvania all the way to Kansas. Hell of a long trip. And the woman sitting next to me just was like, hey. I of course, was like, hey. And then we talked for like 4 hours. But there's always that kind of person, right? That person will just reach out and be like, hey, what's going on? And it's almost always something. It's fascinating how often you will see this kind of thing start from a shared perspective. And what is that shared perspective almost universally? It's either money or the weather. Because, and this is sad, two of the most commonplace, commonly shared tribulations that we have as a human being, as a species, is not having enough money and the weather. Yeah, complaining about little things. So then the music fires up, and I was really confused about the musical choice until I realized, no, Plutonia, wait! I realized it was actually the credits music, and I was like, oh, the episode's over. And that's the last thing I wanted to comment here, is that, you know, it's astonishingly well-paced. I didn't even notice the episode was over until the credits start rolling, which is not the first time I've said that in the last week. I also... wonderful world building there. Thank you for pointing that out, Cashel. Used to be you could just drive across the wasteland before the corpos moved in. I do think this one qualifies as red, personally. I think this is a good one. I think this is, it's just, even though the core meat of the episode is almost entirely build-up, and you can see there's a whole lot of build-up going on here, the execution is still just fantastic. The execution carries everything above Orange, in my opinion. Because remember, a lot of... I mentioned this previously, but for those of you who weren't watching any of the previous Ruminations over the last few days, Orange is damned good. In fact, Orange is pretty freaking good. It is red that is amazing, and purple is even above that, for a bit of perspective. So while I do think this is a lesser red than the previous one, I do think this is absolutely red. Do I have any expectations going into the show? I almost vetoed this show. I really thought about it. And you're probably thinking, why? So, for being too real is the simplest way I could put it. And yeah, it was specifically the prison arc. I was aware of the prison arc. I know there is a prison arc. I actually don't know much about it, to be quite honest with you. But I know that it's very well done. And that makes it, pretty much by definition, disturbing. So, almost vetoed it. I actually had a serious conversation with several people, including Rax, on if I should go ahead and pull the plug on this and just shut that one down. I don't know why I'm saying that one, this one, the one we're currently covering. At this point, I'm just going to knuckle down. We're going to do it. And I want to explain why, if I may, if that's okay. I'm going to get a little personal here. Some of you know I've actually been to jail twice. or miraculously more like 7 times, but let's not get into that. Don't worry, I was innocent. But that's sort of the point, isn't it? It's actually kind of worse if you're innocent, because you've done nothing wrong, and now you're being brutalized for it. For those of you not aware, we have a system here in the United States, which is called innocent until proven guilty, and that is true in the courtroom. But the courtroom is the last place you go to in that whole process. Do you know what every other place in that process treats you like? At every other step, including public opinion, including personal people, including when they actually bring you in, the actual cops who come to arrest you, including when you're in the holding cell, when you're in the initial jail, when you're in the actual long-term jail, when you go to the super long-term jail, which is the high security stuff. Guess what all of those treat you as? They treat you as if you're guilty. You're there, therefore you're guilty. Yeah, jail and prison are 2 different things. Now, there's actually some asterisks there, but generally speaking, jail is temporary, prison is sentenced. If you are picked up off the street and they don't even know what to do with you, you will probably be sent to jail. That's even something that I'm in favor of if, big asterisk, the jails were better. The problem is jails are underfunded and get almost all of their funding from how many people they have in holding at a given point in time. I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole. As you might imagine, I have a lot of opinions about this, and I've done a lot of research on this. So, I've been brutalized in an unpleasant place. In fact, by and large, most prisons are actually nicer places than most jails because of variances in quality, funding, and oversight. So, yeah, I don't want to get into privatization. Let's not even touch that nonsense. So, a realistic look at imprisonment is not something I particularly want to have in my life right now. And now you're probably trying to think, well, then why did you allow this? Something that's been pushed a great deal, those are not stories, unfortunately, Doom Rider. Something that's been pushed a great deal is that one of the best ways for someone like me to push through trauma is to actually pull it out in the open, right? To not let it sit in the corner and fester. To pull it out right here, acknowledge that it's there, that these horrible, horrible things happen to me, and then just let it sit there, because that's a part of me now. It's a part of my life. And to try and diminish its power over me is the idea. And I know this sounds really goddamn stupid, but I had the thought that going ahead and covering the show, not just watching the show, that's different, but covering the show, I have to have my analysis brain on when we get to the prison arc. I have to be paying attention. I have to be thinking in depth about it, and then I have to share it with you. So, pulling it out into the open and actually discussing it is, in a way, a form of treatment, for lack of a better way to put that. And that's why I decided to allow the show. So, that's why. I hope that answers the question. Not that we're getting there to tomorrow, I think. Today? I don't know. I have no idea exactly how far out it is. So, yeah. What is the next episode? Reckoning. The next episode is Reckoning. Oh, that should be fun. I suppose I should go ahead and drop off the little recording. Sorry, YouTube. Sorry.